All right, welcome. We're going to jump into 1.4 of Hurley. Talk about the concepts of validity, truth, soundness, strength, and cogency. All right, all you mind tappers. I added practice assignments. I'm going to do this for everything we do. I set it on, so if you go to mind tap, you'll see these aptly assignments. It'll say practice. I timed them and made them random. Let me know if that is okay. And then after you practice those, you can jump in and boom. Some of you guys are struggling, so I deleted some of your things. I can delete one attempt if you want to do it again. So I would suggest if you didn't do well in those first four, let me know. I'll delete an attempt, go back and do these practice ones, and then ace these homework assignments. All right. So I hope you guys have been taking advantage of some of these tools. I like that Hurley himself has come out of the woodwork and made some videos and whatnot. All right. So let's jump into this. We'll do this later. My buddy Greg's book. All right. So logic 1.4, 13th edition. So for both deductive and inductive arguments, we're going to ask these questions. Do the premises support the conclusion? And secondly, are all the premises true? Now, this is strange, but we always have to assume the premises to be true. And we're going to try to find out validity to see if it necessarily follows that the conclusion is true. So yeah, if it does, the argument is valid. If not, it is invalid. So here's a summary of what we're going to do today. First off, these are for inductive arguments. We want to determine whether it probably follows that the conclusion is true. If it does, the argument is strong. If not, it is weak. Now, this is independent of truth. Secondly, we want to keep in mind the requirements that the premises actually support the conclusion and they not ignore important evidence. This might be difficult to figure out in areas we don't quite know much about, but hey. Third, finally, if the argument is either valid or strong, then we turn to the second question and determine whether the premises are actually true. So if the premises are true, that property the argument has is called soundness in the case of deductive arguments. Or in the case of inductive arguments, it's cogent. So all invalid deductive arguments are unsound, and all weak inductive arguments are uncogent. All right. So we're talking about the properties of arguments, deductive arguments and inductive arguments. We want to be careful of what properties we attribute to arguments and statements. So in logic, we never say an argument is true or false, and we don't speak of statements or propositions as being valid or invalid or strong or weak. Arguments are the kind of things that are valid or invalid, strong or weak. And statements or propositions are true or false. So we want to make sure we get clear on that. All right. So valid versus invalid deductive arguments. You just got to learn this. Valid deductive arguments are arguments in which it is impossible for the conclusion to be false given that the premises are true. And invalid deductive arguments are arguments in which it is possible for the conclusion to be false given that the premises are true. All right. So yeah, in general, the validity is not determined by the truth or falsity of the premises. We have a special case here, but there's good charts in Hurley, 1.1 and 1.2, if you want to look at those in the MindTap textbook. All right. So valid deductive arguments can be unsound, false premises, and false conclusion. Let's look at the following example. Premise 1. All automakers are computer manufacturers. Premise 2, United Airlines is an automaker. Conclusion, therefore United Airlines is a computer manufacturer. Okay, so what do we know about this argument? This is a valid argument. The conclusion follows if we assume premise 1 and premise 2 are true. And we're like, yeah, that conclusion follows. But the problem is we have premise 1 is false, premise 2 is false, and the conclusion is false. All right? Now, there's one odd case of truth or falsity that will determine the validity if you have true premises and a false conclusion. So any deductive argument actually having true premises and an actually false conclusion is invalid. So that's just by definition for validity. If the premises are true, then the conclusion has to be true for valid arguments. And your boy Hurley says this is the most important point of deductive logic. So let's look at some examples. It's good to try these things out. I cut out the writing exercises, but maybe I should add some. Email me, let me know, so I can read your text. All right, premise 1. If my car is at my sister's house in Houston, then it is flooded. Premise 2. My car was at my sister's house in Houston. Conclusion, therefore my car is flooded. So, this is actually a deductive valid argument. It's actually called modus ponens. If P then Q, P therefore Q. So that is a sound argument too. Yes, my Corolla was flooded last week. My sister had 2 inches of water, but so they're very lucky they didn't get it much worse, since a lot of their friends are homeless and whatnot. All right, so do you guys see the difference? We can have a valid argument and that's not sound, because soundness has to do with truth. So let's go into soundness a little bit more in depth. So the property of soundness can only show up on a valid deductive argument with all true premises. So a sound argument is a valid argument with all true premises. All right? So let's look at this one. Premise 1, all flowers are plants, all daisies are flowers, therefore all daisies are plants. All right? So premise 1, is it true that all flowers are plants? Yeah. Premise 2, all daisies are flowers. Is that true? Yes. So therefore, all daisies are plants. All right. We're going to be doing categorical syllogisms in the next few weeks. Chapters 4 and 5. So you'll have these kind of arguments at your ears. All right. Let's ask ourselves this. Quiz yourself. Is this a valid deductive argument? And if it is this a sound argument? Premise 1, all humans should encourage their depressed friends to commit suicide. Premise 2, the Beeb's friend Selena is depressed. Conclusion, the Beeb should encourage Selena to commit suicide. All right? So, that seems to be a valid argument. The conclusion does follow from the premises. But is this a sound argument? If not sound, what premise or premises are problematic or false? All right. It's not sound because premise 1 and premise 2, well, I don't know if Selena's depressed or not, but at least premise 1 is false. You should not encourage your depressed friends to commit suicide. All right. Try it if you want. If you want to send me some examples anytime by email, that's fine. I don't interact with you guys enough, so it feels a little awkward that we're not in a classroom talking about this stuff. But yeah, let's use email, and we can use phone if we need to, or Skype, or whatnot. All right. Excuse me. Okay, so just as an example with Selena's depression, sometimes we don't know. Sometimes we can't determine soundness due to lack of knowledge. If we don't know anything about Selena, then we can't know about her mental states at the moment. So yeah, since many premises have truth values that are unknown or impossible to determine, it's not always possible for you in your epistemic position to determine the soundness of a deductive argument. An epistemic position is your place of knowing. Remember, epistemology is the philosophy of knowledge, and so it's an epistemic position is where we sit mentally. All right, so we'll look at a couple arguments in the following slides, and we want to worry about the property of soundness and distinguish it from validity. All right. Are these valid or are these sound? If they're not sound, what premise is false? Premise 1. If God exists, then there is no gratuitous or unnecessary evil in the world. Premise 2. God exists. Conclusion. Therefore, there is no gratuitous or unnecessary evil in the world. All right. Let's look at the second argument. Premise 1. If God exists, then there is no gratuitous, unnecessary evil in the world. There is gratuitous evil in the world. Conclusion, therefore, it is not the case that God exists. Now, if you take philosophy of religion, you're going to see this, and this is a famous phrase. One man's modus ponens is another man's modus tollens. This first argument is modus ponens. The second argument is modus tollens. When we get to chapter 7, these are going to be rules we're going to use in our proofs. So you'll become great friends with modus ponens and modus tollens. All right. So yeah, modus ponens, if P then Q, P therefore Q. Modus tollens, if P then Q, not Q, therefore not P. It's the bottom one. Now, where philosophers debate this is premise 2 in both arguments. So, my own view is that the arguments for God's existence overwhelm the evidence that there's gratuitous evil in the world. So, but William Rowe, one of my favorite philosophers, he wrote the book Philosophy of Religion I've used for years. He became an atheist in seminary because of the problem of gratuitous evil. All right, so he disagrees with me that the arguments for God's existence are overwhelming, and so he justifies his atheism that way. You be the judge. All right. Now, inductive arguments, all inductive arguments are invalid arguments. And the question is whether or not they're strong or weak. So in science, we're using induction all the time. And you might say maybe most of our arguments during the day are inductive arguments. All right, let's just read this. Strong inductive arguments are arguments in which it is improbable that the conclusion is false given that the premises are true. In such arguments, conclusion does probably follow from the premises. Conversely, a weak inductive argument is an argument in which the conclusion does not follow probably from the premises, even though it is claimed to. And we see weak inductive arguments all the time on cable news. Just turn it on and watch it. All right, Hurley brings up this total evidence requirement. So let's try to get a grip on this. So when we speak of the premises being true, we mean true in the complete sense. So the premises must not exclude or overlook some crucial piece of evidence that undermines the stated premises and requires a different conclusion. So if the total evidence requirement is not met, the argument might have literally true premises and a probably false conclusion and still be strong. So if you look at circumstantial evidence murder trials and you have 100 pieces of evidence, if you just chose like maybe 100 pieces of evidence for or against that are presented for the guilt of somebody. So if you selectively choose only the piece of evidence in favor of his guilt, then he's going to look guilty and you might not meet the total evidence requirement since all the evidence was not thrown on the table in the argument. Does that make sense? Yeah, in science, you have these anomalies and so on that are not necessarily explained by the evidence, so those are factors. All right, last sentence here. Many times we can only evaluate whether an inductive argument is strong. It might require more study to determine if the premises are true. So yeah, many arguments are outside our areas of expertise or common sense, so we can only determine that they are strong. So climate science, the geological record, any kind of astrophysics, the Higgs boson particle. I mean, if that's your field of study, you might have enough evidence to make some strong arguments. But for clowns on the street like me, no. All right. Now, just a tangent here. Metaphysics, we're talking about degreed or real properties. Some properties are absolute or real, some properties are degreed. So baldness, that is a degreed property. I am about 72% bald. All right? I could grow a mean horseshoe if I wanted. Being pregnant, now that is 100% or nothing. If you have one of those clear blue easy strips, it doesn't say 60% pregnant. It says yes or no. Height is a degreed property. Charge, positive, negative, or neutral. That's married. You really can't be 50% married. And strength. The strength of an argument, these are a degreed property. So why do we bring this up? Because strength is a degreed property of inductive arguments. It could be weak to strong, worthless, lead you to absolute certainty, and so on. Uniformity of nature. Read that in the second paragraph into Hurley's inductive arguments. So, this is one of the controversial philosophical presuppositions of all the empirical sciences, and we need this in logic as well. Sugar is going to taste the same tomorrow. Gold is still going to have the same atomic number tomorrow. Gravity is not going to change tomorrow, and so on. Like we assume the uniformity of nature, the periodic table stays the same, physics stay the same. The four laws of physics, weak and strong nuclear force, electromagnetism, gravity. If these don't stay the same, then we can't predict anything or make any generalizations. All right. Now, this is a side note. Is this a feature of the universe that needs to be explained? Now, personally, I think it does. Now, all ancient philosophers thought this needed to be explained. And we need to ask, what's the explanation? Is a theistic explanation, God, naturalistic, or the atheistic presupposition, explanation, which is, it just is. The Logos. That was Heraclitus' answer, and Christians jumped on that. Is it the Force? So think about that. If you want to talk about this tangent, email me. What's the best explanation of the uniformity of nature? All right, inductive arguments. Oh, shoot. What am I doing here? All right, cogent versus strong. All right, just like soundness was the property of truth for valid deductive arguments, cogency, or what Johnson calls reliability, that's going to be the property of truth for inductive arguments. So a cogent argument is a strong inductive argument with all true premises. Sorry, let me throw that in there. So, for example, every previous U.S. president was older than 40. Therefore, probably the next U.S. president will be older than 40. All right, so a cogent argument is an inductive argument that is strong and has all true premises. Premises must be true in the sense of meeting the total evidence requirement or any combination of these. So, what do you make of this example? How strong is that? You might, what do you have to be, 35 to be president? So who knows? The president of France is under 40, so we'll see. All right, uncogent is what we call an inductive argument with one or all of the following properties. It is weak, it's one or more false properties, false premises, and 3, it fails to meet the total evidence requirement, or any combination of these. All right. So, back to arguments for God's existence. What about this argument? Is this valid, sound, cogent? Premise 1. Everything that exists in the universe is best explained by naturalism, scientific atheism, rather than theism, or God. Premise 2. Even if some features of the universe are explainable in theism, no explanation is better than a theistic explanation. Premise 3. There are trillions of cases of gratuitous, unnecessary evil every year in the world. This is best explained by naturalism. Conclusion. Therefore, it is more probable that naturalism, the worldview of scientific atheism, is true. All right, let me know what you think. What about this argument? Premise 1. The Kalam cosmological argument shows God is the best explanation of the beginning of the universe. Premise 2. The noological argument, or the argument from mind, shows that God is the best explanation of consciousness, or minds, in humans. Premise 3. The moral argument shows that God is the best explanation of good and evil in the universe. Premise 4. The new design argument shows that God is the best explanation of the fine-tuning of the physics. Premise 5. The best near-death experience reports are best explained by God's existence. Premise 6. Religious experience of God have had by philosophers like Augustine, Aquinas, Descartes, and Blaise Pascal are best explained by God's existence. Conclusion. Therefore, God's existence is more probable than not. All right. Now, have any of you studied any of these arguments for God's existence? So, this is an invalid argument. This is an invalid argument. Anytime you conclude it's more probable than this, you're going to get an invalid argument. So, have you studied any of these arguments? You might not be in a position to judge whether or not this is cogent or strong. Okay? So, the same here. So for me, I think actually this is a strong and cogent argument, but you guys are in a different epistemic position. It'll require more study. So that's why, yeah, it would take a lot more study to meet the total evidence requirement for the last two arguments. All right, shoot me an email if you want to discuss it. All right, I guess this is done. We'll get out of this and let's go to Johnson's PowerPoint. All right, Dr. Gregory Johnson teaches at Mississippi State University. This is a brand new book, Argument and Inference, came out 2017, MIT Press. I used parts of this for years when I taught at the University of Cincinnati at their Claremont College. And yeah, so we're going to back up and do some more basics and see if this helps, and we'll do a lot of examples. And that's me on the left, Johnson. We were in Greece last summer for a month. Our study abroad with Mississippi State didn't go. We only had 5 students sign up, so we just went ourselves for a month and camped all over. And there's our other buddy. All right. So, introduction to arguments. This will cover a lot of the things from 1.1 to 1.4. So you can stop this if you want or proceed. All right, let's say that you know these things. There is a bridge in your town that hundreds of cars just drive over every day. Engineers who work for the town regularly inspect the bridge, and every once in a while repairs are made to the bridge. All right. Now, is there a new piece of information that you could reasonably come up with? And yeah, this bridge will be safe to drive over tomorrow. So, we have premises from this, and we can make a new conclusion which adds new information. So premise 1, there's a bridge in your town that hundreds of cars drive over every day. Premise 2, engineers working on the town regularly inspect the bridge. Premise 3, periodically repairs are made to the bridge. Therefore, we can conclude this bridge will be safe to drive over tomorrow. Now, is this a deductive or inductive argument? That's right. Inductive. Now, is it strong? Is this good evidence for the conclusion? All right. What's the definition of an argument? A premise or set of premises are intended to support a conclusion. They might not actually do so. Hurley is more strict on this. He says we shouldn't psychologize. So sometimes it's hard to determine the intentions. All right. Whoops. All right. So let's take a look at these three arguments here, A, B, and C, and let's see what they are. So, premise 1, there's a bridge in your town that hundreds of cars drive over every day. Premise 2, engineers who work for the town regularly inspect the bridge. Periodically, repairs are made to the bridge. Conclusion, this bridge will be safe to drive over tomorrow. Why don't you write down your ideas right now on a scrap paper or a post-it note or something, or a napkin. B, premise 1, in high school, Stan was a member of the chess club, the audiovisual club, and the juggling club. Conclusion, Stan is smart. C, premise 1, only students who are members of the juggling club can learn how to breathe fire. Premise 2, Mary isn't a member of the juggling club. Conclusion, Mary can't learn how to breathe fire. So, why don't you evaluate these arguments? What are they? Deductive, inductive, valid, invalid, sound, cogent. All right. So, A, this is wrong. A, it's actually invalid. But it's inductively strong. And we don't know if it's cogent or not, but if those premises are true, then yes, we get a strong argument. Okay. So, B, in high school, Stan was a member of the chess club, the audiovisual club, and the juggling club. C, Stan is smart. All right, you might say that, yeah, if you do all that stuff, maybe you have to be smart. So that's probably true. All right. Conclusion, only students who are members of the juggling club can learn how to breathe fire. Mary is a member of the juggling club. Mary can't learn how to breathe fire. All right. That's inductively medium or weak. And so, yeah, and it's not cogent either. All right. Let's look at this. Is this an argument? If it is, write out the premise or premises and conclusion. I have eaten bread almost every day of my life, and every time I've done so, it has provided nourishment. So the next time I eat bread, it will provide nourishment. All right, do we have any indicator words here? Remember that from 1.1. Those are important. So yeah, it is an argument. So you have so, which is an indicator word, therefore. Premise 1, I've eaten bread almost every day of my life. Premise 2, every time I've eaten bread has provided nourishment. Conclusion, therefore, the next time I eat bread, it will provide nourishment. All right, is this an argument? The night of Mozart's death was dark and stormy. At the funeral, too, it began to rage and storm. Rain and snow fell at the same time, as if nature wanted to show her anger. No, that's not an argument. All right, is this an argument? Bats are the only mammals that can fly. Bartok is a mammal, but he is not a bat. Thus, Bartok cannot fly. Yeah, that's an argument. Premise 1, bats are the only animals that can fly. Premise 2, Bartok is a mammal, but he's not a bat. Thus, Bartok cannot fly. All right. So now we're moving back to what are good arguments. So as long as there are premises supporting or trying to support a conclusion, then we have an argument. Further question is whether the argument satisfies either of these two standards. And so are good arguments. So we just went over this earlier, but something that's deductively valid, and we're looking for inductively strong. To go over these again. So deductively valid, if we assume the premises are true, then the conclusion has to be true. It follows necessarily. Inductively strong. So if the argument is not deductively valid, but if the premises are true, then they make it probable that the conclusion is true. Okay? So, when is an argument deductively invalid? If an argument is inductively strong, then it is also what else? Think about it for a second. All right. So yeah, if the conclusion doesn't follow from the premises, so even if the premises are true, the conclusion doesn't have to be true. So truth is independent of the structure. Validity has to do with the structure of the argument, not the truth of it. If an argument is inductively strong, then we know it is what else is deductively invalid. So inductive arguments are all invalid arguments, but again, that doesn't mean they're bad at all, since most of our arguments are invalid arguments that are good inductive arguments. Well, all right. So if an argument is invalid but not inductively strong, then what can it be? If it is invalid and not inductively strong, then it is inductively medium strength or inductively weak or worthless. So Dr. Johnson adds these categories so you can kind of make up your own. All right. So let's think about these. Pause it. Write down answers for A, B, and C, and then resume in a second. You paused? All right. So A, Seoul, South Korea is larger than Mexico City. Premise 2, Mexico City is larger than New York City. Conclusion, therefore, Seoul is larger than New York City. That's a deductively valid argument. Is it sound? Are the premises true? I actually have no idea. Pardon my ignorance. So some of you might have more knowledge about this and you can judge its soundness, but I can't. All right, B. Premise 1, there's a bridge in your town, hundreds of cars drive every day. We did that before. So it's inductively strong. So it's invalid, and it's inductive argument, and it's strong argument. All right? That's that one I had the wrong answer for in the beginning, a few slides ago. So yeah, it's invalid, inductively strong. C, premise 1, it is either warm outside or cold outside. Premise 2, it is not cold outside. Conclusion, therefore, it is warm outside. So that is deductively valid. We're going to see a lot of these disjunctive syllogisms, chapter 7, one of our rules. All right. Why don't you read these, see if you can judge them. Valid or invalid. You crazy. All right. A. Premise 1, Will Ferrell is a warm-blooded goat animal. Premise 2, all goats are warm-blooded animals. Therefore, Will Ferrell is a goat. That is invalid. The conclusion does not follow for the premises. Now B. Premise 1, Will Ferrell is a warm-blooded animal. All warm-blooded animals are goats. Conclusion, therefore Will Ferrell is a goat. That is valid. Is it sound? No. Why? Soundness has to do with the truth of the premises. Which premise is false? That's right. Premise 2, all warm-blooded animals are goats. That is obviously false. All right. So this one, all right. Is this valid or invalid? If Peter went to the police, then Margaret was arrested today. Premise 2, Margaret was arrested today. Premise, therefore, conclusion, Peter went to the police. Is that valid or invalid? That's right. This is actually invalid. This is a fallacy of affirming the consequent. We'll see more of this. You'll learn this because you'll realize it's the valid form of this is modus ponens. So if Peter went to the police and Margaret was arrested today, Margaret was arrested today. But you know what? Margaret could have been arrested for 1,000 other reasons without Peter's help. So we don't know. So therefore went to the police. Here, this example is a little bit easier, I think, to see the fallacy of affirming the consequent invalid. So if the car, premise 1, if the car starts, then it has gas. Premise 2, the car has gas, therefore the car starts. Is that true? No. Because you can obviously see there could be a trillion other things wrong with the car. All right, does that make sense? All right. What about this? If Peter went to the police today, then Margaret was arrested today. Premise 2, Peter went to the police. Conclusion, therefore Margaret was arrested today. This has a valid form. This is modus ponens. If P, then Q, P, therefore Q. So the conclusion follows necessarily. All right? All right. Okay, let's do a few more of these. How about this one? Premise 1, Peter's a human 12-year-old and he can breathe underwater without any artificial aids. Premise 2, both of Peter's parents can breathe underwater. Premise 3, all of Peter's aunts and uncles can breathe underwater. Premise 4, all of Peter's grandparents can breathe underwater. Premise 5, Peter's older sister can breathe underwater. Therefore, we conclude Peter's younger brother will be able to breathe underwater. Is this a valid deductive argument? No. Is it invalid? Yes. So we have an inductive argument here, evidence for the conclusion. Is this inductively strong, medium, or weak? Look at this evidence. From what you know of genetics and biology, well, if you assume premise 1 through premise 5 are true, would that be great evidence for conclusion? And I would say, yeah. Peter's younger brother will be able to breathe underwater. Probably. Okay? But is this cogent? Are these things true? I doubt it. So it's not cogent. All right, you guys are online, so forget this. We're not doing the handout in class. So again, we're going to review the truth properties. Remember, soundness is a property of valid deductive arguments. Cogency or reliability is a property of strong inductive arguments. All right? So yeah, soundness, deductive arguments, valid deductive arguments. Cogent arguments, that's strong inductive arguments. So soundness is a property if the argument is valid and the premises are true. Cogent or reliable, the argument is inductively strong and the premises are true. All right. So quick quiz here. What's the difference between validity and soundness? Validity has to do with structure. Soundness has to do with the truth of the premises and deductive arguments. Can an argument be invalid and cogent? And what's the difference between inductively strong and reliable? All right. Again, like we said, for valid argument, it just has to do with structure. It doesn't matter whether the premises are true or false. So we're assuming they're true to judge the structure. Sound argument has to have all true premises. All right. 2, since inductively strong argument is invalid, an argument can be invalid and cogent reliable. Put another way, all cogent reliable arguments are invalid, but not all invalid arguments are cogent reliable. Remember, we use invalid arguments in science all the time when we generalize and do all these things. So, make inferences to the best explanation. Those are all invalid arguments, but they can be quite strong. 3, for an inductively strong argument, it doesn't matter if the premises are true or false. A cogent reliable argument has to have all true premises. All right, let's do a couple more examples. And we want to know if these are deductive, inductive, sound, or cogent, or neither. Premise 1. Wilt Chamberlain's oldest son is George W. Bush. Premise 2. George W. Bush was the president. C. Wilt Chamberlain's oldest son was the president. Second argument. Premise 1. George Herbert Walker Bush's oldest son is George W. Bush. Premise 2. George W. Bush was the president. George Herbert Walker Bush's oldest son was the president. All right. So, 1, first argument, that's neither sound nor cogent because premise 1 is false. Okay? So, it's a valid argument, but it's not sound. 2, what is this? Premise 1. George Bush is W was president, therefore was a president. That's valid. The conclusion follows from the premises if we assume they're true. And it's sound. Premise 1 and premise 2 are true, unlike in this first argument. All right. So, let's go back to these. Let's just look at them. All right, premise 1, never U.S. presidential election since 1852. Either Democratic candidate or the Republican candidate has won. Conclusion, Democratic candidate or the Republican candidate will win the 2020 U.S. presidential election. All right. Now, is this a valid deductive argument? No, it doesn't have to follow. You could have third party Gary Johnson show up and win. But it is inductively strong. We know that it's just very hard for third parties to run. You're the Bull Moose Party. Theodore Roosevelt ran as a progressive Republican back 100 years ago, and he came the closest. All right. The Peter argument about breathing underwater. This is inductively strong, as we said before, and it's not cogent because this is not water world. You can't breathe underwater. All right. I think we got a couple more arguments here, then we'll take a break. So this has all true premises. Will Ferrell is a warm-blooded animal. All goats are warm-blooded animals. Therefore, Will Ferrell is a goat. What do you guys think? What's the problem with this? So this is not valid, and it's not inductively strong. The conclusion does not follow from those premises. All right. All right. I think we got one more. All right. Is this valid or inductively sound or cogent reliable? Premise 1, Jones Memorial Bridge is regularly inspected by qualified engineers. Premise 2, cars and trucks have been driving over for many years. Conclusion, therefore it will be safe to drive over the Jones Memorial Bridge tomorrow. All right. This is kind of a probability argument, but So it's not a valid argument. It's an invalid argument. It's inductively. It's deductive argument. Is it strong or weak? Now, I think it's strong, inductively strong. But is it cogent or reliable? I don't even know what the Jones Memorial Bridge is or if it exists. Okay? So yeah, we don't know if this bridge exists, so we can't even judge it cogent or reliable. So it does make sense, inductively strong. Qualified engineers should be able to tell if a bridge is going to fall down. So yeah, the conclusion makes sense. We should believe it if the premises are true. Problem is we don't know if they're true. All right? So that's one of the problems with human beings. We just always need to keep learning and learning and learning. All right, we'll pause here and we will start with this. But yeah, this is difficult since you guys are not in front of me. So tell me, give me some feedback if you watch this. What was good, what was bad, if we need more problems. If you'd rather me go over the mind tap exercises as well, practice exercises, I could do these Aplia deals, let me know. Alright, don't forget to practice the exercises. Alright, let me know what's up.